we're investing in our communities. We are able to build our communities, but we're simultaneously creating it a space for ourselves and doing it contextually and in a mindful way. So that way, the people who are part of the community can continue to be so. And so I have with me today a panel of amazing leaders, practitioners, policymakers, change makers, with me across the spectrum of housing. So we have policy, we have practice, we have community. And so today is hopefully the first of many times going forward that you will see all of these people and all of these agencies represented together in conversations to talk together about how we can develop our communities. So I will introduce you to our panelists today. We have with us Council Member for District F, Tiffany D. Thomas. I had to make sure to say the D. Who is also the chair of the Houston Housing Committee. Next to her, we have Mr. Jason Hyman, who is an urban planner, broker, and owner of the office of Jason T. Hyman. We have Zoe Middleton, who is a fierce advocate for the community and also a board member on the Midtown Redevelopment Authority. We have Mr. Lloyd Ford, a proud Third Ward resident, a community organizer, and the owner of Houston's Black Store, one of the only Black-owned beauty supply stores in the city of Houston. Next to him, we have I'm sorry, I always mispronounce your last name. We have Ms. Christa Stoneham, who is the new CEO of the Houston Land Bank. And so thank you all for being with me today. I'm going to move a little bit back and forth between standing and seating, so that way as we get into the conversation, we want it to feel very natural, very organic. We are going to talk around some preset ideas that we have about community and engagement and working together. And then once we get to the end, we'll be able to give you the opportunity to engage one-on-one with the panelists. Is that okay? All right. Okay. So let's start off the conversation. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Brittany Hyman. I am the director of the Third Ward Real Estate Council. I'm an urban planner who uses strategic communications to influence policy. I love everything policy because a lot of the things that we see in our communities that impact the way that we live happen long before we're even thinking about it. And so I love to make sure that we are aware of how to be in tune with it, how to have a part and a say in it, and look forward to the ways that we can use it to protect our neighborhoods. So I'm gonna start with policy. So what are some policy changes that you feel could protect neighborhoods and lower the barrier of entry for emerging developers? I'm gonna throw that right at Councilmember Thomas.
I was ruminating. I was like, Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So what are some policy changes that could protect our neighborhoods and lower the barrier of entry for emerging developers? For example, the mayor of Atlanta created policies when she came in and said, Mayor Keisha Bottoms, who came in, she said, I want to protect these neighborhoods that are vulnerable to gentrification. And she created policies that made that so. So what are some things? Houston is a city that doesn't have zoning. We have to be a little bit more creative in how we go and protect our neighborhoods, but also support development. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I will share with you what we're currently doing and then respond to where we can go from there. So you're absolutely right. We're not necessarily the best policy city. We are a city that we do things in practice. And historically, the city we have mastered the practice of tearing things down and building on top of it, and not necessarily preserving our story and investing in those so-called valued historical neighborhoods. So what's currently happening within the planning department, and it should be coming to council fairly soon, is that we are, the planning department will offer an ordinance to create a conservation district which is important to our communities. So there'll be different levels of protection. Currently, historic preservation designation is the most strict, where the city has to approve every iteration of that. But what we are realizing through this escalated in the last 15 years of gentrification that has taken over our neighborhoods, much of our story has been lost, and the shifting of population. So that's what's currently happening. I will give credit to the mayor's complete communities. The neighborhoods that he has identified has focused private dollars and public dollar attention into those neighborhoods. Oftentimes when we talk about community development, and I'm coming to this space as a faculty member at Prairie View that teaches this every week. So and shout out to Christa, she's a graduate of the program. Gotta always do that PV link up. There's a way that I teach it, and then there's a way that it actually happens, right, in cities. So we can talk about that another time. So, because those two things don't always align. But for the complete communities, when we look at community development, we're often thinking about housing and a grocery store. Like, that's what you're gonna constantly hear. We want a grocery store, we want a neighborhood. But investing in a neighborhood often starts with the infrastructure underneath it, right? And so a part of the question that we have to answer that we have not been able to answer as a city is, what is the tipping point of investment? So what is the tipping point that if we invest X amount of dollars into this neighborhood, that it starts self-generating? That's not a question that we can answer. And that's problematic to me, right? And it should be problematic to anyone else, because at some point we have to start qualifying the amount of money we're putting into neighborhoods and articulating out that investment. So I think it's twofold. One, there's some ordinances and some things that are coming through because there's a sensitivity to protecting neighborhoods, and then preserving that story. That's one, and that's happening, and we should pay attention to that. And I will tell you, Riverside is currently in a heated debate around this. Heated debate. So if your mama and them is from that area, I would highly encourage you to keep your eyes open on that conversation, what's happening with Riverside and their historic preservation designation. And then I would also push in terms of barriers for developers to participate. Speaking again to the practice of the work that we do, and I feel like I shared this in Jason's workshop, we do a lot of things in practice, but a lot of folks really don't know what we do at the city. It's large, it can be cumbersome, it can be difficult. And so a lot of those opportunities that we're creating, they're out of that. So what I could encourage is, one, to, if I was a smaller scale developer, you're just worried about making sure you have financing to complete your project and working through the hurdles of what it even means for you to, take on this debt and to complete that project. And sometimes the language is not written for smaller developers with a limited scale or limited experience to participate. So what we have started doing probably the last 20 months or so is creating projects with smaller nonprofits, smaller developers to get them in the system of the city so they can get comfortable with working with the city, deliverables, outcomes, reporting, financial, all of the type of fiscal stuff that is attached to that, and it's proving to show success. We do not have an official portal for community-based builders, but we do have master contract agreements with nonprofits that understand the fabric and the spirit of these neighborhoods that they're developing. Anyone could talk to, the Houston Land Trust. I'm sure the Land Bank could give you lots of feedback about how we've had to self-correct from developers that have done some damage in our neighborhoods that are not sensitive to community, because they're just flipping a house. They're just coming in and flipping a house, and they have no sensitivity to that. And there's been a call, there's been a request from the city to ensure that we do and in both. Identify these community-based developers, but then also make it the opportunity available for them to actually be successful. Because part of the trick in the trade is like, we tried and then they didn't do well, so then that's it. Right? We don't give them another opportunity when we've extended grace and adjustment to other large box developers. So we're self-correcting that, and we've implemented a scorecard for accountability and to do something. So all of those things are in person. in progress, I'm sorry.
And I think, can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
It works.
It's me. Is it me? It is. So I think that's an important conversation when we talk about, like you said, the changes that have happened over the last 20 months, because a lot of times there is this time gap. The city has to make their plans. They cannot just do things like immediately. There's the planning, and then there's also the practice, because the market is not waiting. The market is moving. Things are moving. And so I want to talk about how, from the developer's perspective, how can they give you all that input in real time? And I also want to talk about, to your point of making sure that you're being a part of the call. I want to hear from Zoe, who is, you've taken your work as an advocate and said, okay, now I'm going to get on this board because I need to have a strong voice with the people.
Well, I was placed on the board. I don't can't tell the boss now.
Fair enough. But I am curious about how that process works from working from the inside out. So I'm going to start with Jason in terms of developer being able to give feedback, and what are some of the things that would be helpful, and then how do you work from the inside out?
That's a good question.
Have to ruminate.
Right. How can we work from the inside out? I'm not sure Houston is set up from the inside out like that. I think a council member said it best in terms of like, this is a city of practice. And I think that as developers, like that's the push, right? Pay attention to what's coming, get your plans together, and take it to the table, take it to the city, and press the envelope, push the issue as a small developer. Gain
push the issue where at
so
pop off at.
No. So I think one place that's good is planning commission, and I like to see the planning commission. If you're not familiar, planning commission pretty much sees any development that's coming in your community, and they have to, I want to say, approve it. I won't say disapprove, because I feel like they don't disapprove anything, and that's what I would like to see a bigger change in. It seems as if as long as you as a developer, for instance, can fit within a box, then they'll push it forward without any consideration of context or consequence to the community, right? It just fits the code. And that's disturbing, because that horseshoe is filled with professionals that understand these things, but they are on some level handcuffed by what's in writing. So I think that the small developers, as well as the community behind them, need to be at those types of meetings, really pushing forward, making them listen. You can't make someone listen, but you understand what I'm saying. To at least put that out on the table. Okay. Put that out on the table, because if you go down there, at least right now, it's easier because it's virtual. There's a point in time where these meetings are happening during the middle of the day when you're at work, and so you couldn't attend. So their voice never got heard, and the gavel goes down, or the vote goes, and it moves on. And once that's happened, it's done. So that would be my input, to get involved at that level, at that space.
Okay. And then Zoe, your perspective from the inside out, and you make a good point of there's a difference between, I was appointed to this board, right? And so how do you bridge that gap from, hey, I'm passionate about this, I understand this as a professional, and okay, I'm going to be in spaces where my voice represents many?
Yeah, I mean, there are mixed feelings on how I do that. I think mixed interpretations of how I show up in space. But I think for me, when you get the chance to hold a little bit of power, which is essentially what being on a board is, or being, closer to decision makers or being paid to be close to decision makers, right? I think it kind of comes down to values. And so one of the ways that I try to practice these values is to do, public money for public good, right? So no public dollars without public benefit. Would like to see that in the form of CBAs, independent, legally binding, enforceable agreements. Regionally, we have an enforcement problem. We'll design programs and policies and then with really good intentions really try to make them protective, and then they don't work, and there is no recourse to fix it, right? There's no hotline number to call, there's no nothing like that. But I think it's, public dollars for public good. I think it's bottom-up planning, really doing community engagement first, not doing it as a box to check, making sure that when you have community engagement, you have a way through difference, because that's going to show up, and it ought to show up if we all care about the spaces that we're, planning around, developing around, and investing in. And then I think, spend a lot of my time thinking about transitional strategies. So how do we get from what we know is an unacceptable situation, right? Like an increasingly expensive city, a city that the lowest income people cannot afford to live in, a county that's had 75,000 evictions since the start of the pandemic. How do we move from this unacceptable situation and deal with these really big challenges, which in practice developers are trying to face all the time, right? We need 21,000 units every year for the next 10 years to meet forecasted demand, which is terrifying, keeps me up at night. How do we do that and do it in a way that's guided by our values and creates the world that we want to live in, that we actually haven't seen practice that much. We've seen attempts at it, but we haven't seen the fruits born out of it. And so I think, it is lonely and difficult, but you always have to go back to your values. And I will say, I keep a picture of my aunts and my grandmother and my parents as my desktop background as the way to ground me in doing it, because it's not always comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I do the same thing. I keep my girls, their picture with me, and I'm like,
there you
okay,
go.
am I someone, if they could see me in this moment, would they be proud? Would I want them to emulate?
Because they'll tell you the truth,
Oh,
right?
yes, we are definitely raising truth speakers. But in terms of that groundswell, Lloyd, I really want to hear how you've been able to galvanize so much energy in the community and bringing together players that don't often have a seat at the table, in terms of club owners who usually are having problems in the community. You've been holding community meetings at the clubs now. So how are you able to galvanize people and say, hey, come to the table and bridge those connections?
I would say one thing, I'm from the neighborhood, so I'm from 3rd Ward, grew up, born and raised, Ryan Yates. So I think these are long-bred relationships that we've been having for a long time. But one thing I'll say is, I hate that it takes something that happens to us before we wake up and realize how important something is. And that's community engagement, politics. Y'all touched on some of the stuff earlier, just talking about how do we protect our communities. Our group is called Creative Group Economics, so I always lead with the economics first. So when it comes to economics, when it comes to the contracts, we don't know that Commissioner Rodney Ellis, he had a disparity study done, and we have a lot of black people in Houston, but we don't know from the year 2016 to 2020, only 0.5% of black businesses actually contracted with the city of Houston. That's less than 1%. That's with black mayors. Harris County. I'm sorry, Harris County. But still, 0.5 is just unacceptable. And so we think about that. So I think it goes even further than just creating a scorecard, but creating a card to say, hey, who's over this active of knowing, hey, are these contracts actually going to the people that it's supposed to go to? And one thing we realize, like we say, is no checks and balances. So after that is done, or that person or business and money has already been spent, it's nothing to go back and say, hey, there are damages that need to be paid to these businesses that didn't get those contracts. There's no checking process of, hey, we got this black-owned businesses here to do the contract, but we didn't keep them once the work was done. We kicked them off and hired who we wanted to hire. It's no checks and balances when it comes to things like that. So when we talk about protecting our community, speaking truth to power and the things that we're doing, it's about just getting other people involved. So me and my mission, especially now, is letting people know, of course, everybody don't like politics. But like I say, you can't win the game if you're not playing. So we have to realize that these levers, regardless if we agree with them or not, it affects our lives. And how we get our streets paved is political. How we get our electricity is political. How we get our water is political. We know this from Michigan and other places. So as once we realize that these things touches our lives and there's no way to get away from it, we just have to realize that these things have to be done. Here in District D, have 100,000 registered voters. Only 19,000 actually votes. That's less than 20%. So we have over 80,000 people to reach and get involved that are shaken with Democrat or Republican. Why is that? Nobody's seeing progress. And so that's when we talk about these checks and balances, it's just being there and protecting our communities, and I think it starts with economics.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the idea that here we're talking about resources, right? And how there can be an influx of resources, but if they're not being given in a way that's contextual to the community, what happens to them? And then, you know, once you check that box, if that's all that you're doing and you're not having meaningful engagement, then where do those resources go and what happens to the community members? Christa, I want to make sure that we definitely talk about different land options, what we're doing with lands, because what you're doing with the land bank is innovative. And as the CEO, excuse me, there's a lot of power and responsibility with that. So how can players like who are with you today on the panel, how can they support you in what you're doing, and how can communities find out more about how to engage?
Thank you. And there's so many thoughts that were going in my head as everyone was speaking, so I kind of want to incorporate different snippets that I heard today. Definitely it's helpful, and I'm grateful to have the leadership of Councilmember Thomas as the Housing Chair Committee, because the way that she pushes the agenda literally and figuratively in terms of how to move these communities forward is so important. And I would love, hopefully at one point, if the city could create an affordable housing policy, right? Can there not be a requirement, whether it's 20% or whatnot, for these huge developments to also include that component, so then I can do my mission better and easier, right? Because we work with all Black and brown builders, right? We work with the smaller developers. Now, we only open up our pool once a year, but I'm doing the best I can to let people know as soon as possible that you can be a part of that solution in terms of bringing the community to the table. So when I was with the city, I was with the Complete Communities Initiative, and one of the things I did was assemble a group of architects with the community to design solutions that they wanted to see. It's really important to have a visual aspect. It's great to have, you know, your aspirations, but I want to know, well, what does West Montgomery look like if you're saying you want it revitalized, right? So now here at the land bank, I'm looking to see, do we own any property in these areas, the commercial corridors, so we can help implement what the community said. But I'm also bringing the community to the table as we make our decisions on homes that are being developed as well. We're creating a neighborhood advisory council that will actually score some of the homes that are being developed. I'm allocating about 15 out of the 50 points for them, and we'll assemble them. That's hoping to launch in May. So there's so much that's going on that I'm really excited about in terms of innovative solutions. We have traditionally been in affordable housing, but I am looking for opportunities to address the additional community development needs, whether it's food insecurity, commercial development, flood resiliency, et cetera. But of course, you know, you have to take one bite of the elephant at a time.
Yeah, for sure, because there are a lot of different things that go into quality of life, right? So where you live, how you live, the food you have access to, your environment, all of these things dictate not only how you can survive, but how you can thrive, right? And so when we talk about all these great things about, well, we need housing options, what happens once we have home ownership? Let's talk about generational wealth building, because in the last few years, I'm so happy to hear that people have been like, let's buy the block, generational wealth. But what we don't talk enough about is how to leverage it. So anyone can chime in on this conversation, but what are your thoughts around what are your thoughts around how we access land that's been caught up in title issues, because that process in itself can be seen as not equitable? How do we get the message out about heirship and making sure that we are securing the assets that we are once we're able to acquire them?
Can I start?
Please do.
So Air Properties is a research area of mine at Prairie View. So this is my jam. Step aside. No, I'm just saying. So yes, this is a huge thing that's happening in Houston. For many of you that are unfamiliar with Air Property, particularly Southern Blacks experience this the most. It's a transfer of a property, an asset, or land generation to generation. It's one of the most unstable forms of wealth, and it restricts you from family equity, but also community wealth. So what has happened is, and I'll tell you, even though I study this, I'll tell you it was one of my first public sessions in 2020, and this brother came to public session to complain. He was impacted by Harvey, and he says, Mr. Mayor, I have been working with the housing department and they won't help me. And my first thought was like, yeah, we ain't doing something right. Of course it's us. And I'm going through the backup and I see he's not on the title. So at that moment, I realized this is an Air property. And he says, everybody know my mama gave me this house. I've been here for 25 years. And I'm like, yes. All of us have a story like that. All of us got an uncle or auntie, somebody in the house, and they are not on that deed. So what happens when Hurricane Harvey hits, though? And we have federal dollars to respond to your need, and we can't, because the city cannot come in and touch your private property because you don't own it. Right? So this is a problem. And just by the numbers of Harvey alone for DR17, we had 64 families that had tax issues with their property and could not qualify. We had 94 that were not on the deed. Take the amount of the house, of that market value of that property, and qualify the community wealth that's leaving. So it creates barriers for complete communities and nonprofits and CDCs in the city to come in and revitalize when the wealth is leaving. Then here we go with blight, and then we go with gentrification, and then we go with these things. So this is a real issue. It's a real issue, and all of us are experiencing this. My family is experiencing this right now. I want to encourage you to get serious about your will and estate planning. I want you to get serious about that and move the conversation just to being excited about owning your first home. You have to think beyond your legacy and your community. And what do you want this asset to do in 50 years? What do you want this community to become? Because on one end, we didn't went to Cypress and Pearland and we didn't say, we out of here. And then you get mad when the Starbucks comes and the developer has purchased that property for $25,000 because you found no value. We're dealing with that in Piney Point right now. Right now. So that we can't just talk about first-time home ownership. That's great and we need it. You have to think beyond of what this property is supposed to do. And so also when we look at federal guidelines that's allocating dollars, the federal guidelines do not incorporate any cultural practice of how we operate. That's a cultural thing of how we do, right? So none of that accounts for that. So we have to look at making sure the policy is really informed with cultural practices. So if you had back child support, you couldn't qualify for Harvey. If you had an expired license, you couldn't qualify. And documentation is when you're talking about elders and all of these things, it's a problem. So look at the amount of people that were exiled. So now I hear and see from a different ear when they come and say, I still live in mold in my house. My first thought is not that the city didn't do what we were supposed to do. I'm like, I wonder if that's an Air property. Because you shouldn't have, you're right, we have the money. It's not a matter of money. I wonder if you were on the deed. I wonder if you owned it outright. I wonder if you were clear from your title. So those are some of the things that we have to, the resistance to understanding, and black folks don't like to talk about death. We don't like to do that. We got to do that. We got to have those real conversations and look at legacy planning on what do we want this asset to be for our family, because that is the impetus for us to create our generational and share our generational wealth to the next generation.
Yeah, listening to you speak, for sure.
I teach it, y'all. That's why.
Listening to you talk about it struck a chord with me because I was still at the city in the housing department when Harvey happened. And part of the work that we did was trying to shift the paradigm in how disaster recovery is done, because it is historically done inequitably. Historically, whenever a disaster happens, people who are the most in need, there's a greater gap for them. And the people who already have their assets together and they know how to walk through the insurance system and they know how to fill out the paperwork, they gain wealth. And so everything that you just said in terms of the impact that it has on the community is so true, because when we weren't able to help those people and say, well, it's because we were trying to help the least first, and so it takes longer, it looked as if it failed. And so that impacts policy and the community. So I want to give...
Can I just add one thing? FYI, our tax assessor for the county, Ann Bennett, there's an air exemption form. You could download it off the website and apply for that. So I want everyone to get familiar. You can exempt a property from taxes with an airship. It's available to you. So these are tools that are readily available, that if you got uncle, grandma and them, you need to make sure, and somebody living in that house, you need to put an air exemption on that property. And that's my TED Talk thing.
And so you're right. So when we talk about planning and assets, I want to talk about the community coming together and say, okay, well, I may not have everything that I need to be a first-time homeowner, but how can we collectively pool our resources? Thoughts on how to do that, ways to do it successfully, models that exist, and also options like a land trust where you may not own the land, but you have a step up to get ready for home ownership. So that's not really a question, that's more of like we're guiding the conversation in that way. Yeah, y'all are like, what's the question? So
So I think probably one of the biggest tools, or one of the biggest things you see today is gaining popularity is the crowdfunding mechanism. So, all of us in this room putting up $100 together gets us in that property. If we understand the finance system and how to finance property, right, we got to get away from thinking that we have to have every dollar that's needed to buy a piece of property or to develop a piece of property, and get down to understanding that we only need a portion of it. And that portion can come collectively from each and every last one of us. There are legal structures and mechanisms that allow us to do that in that way. Once we have control, which is one of the things we talked about in the acquisition class, control, site control, now we can get with the land banks and the land trusts and the city and these other entities to drive impact, okay? So I think that's one major mechanism, but really that's rooted around the finance, understanding finance and understanding tax. Those two things push all the levers in your community.
And then for those of us who don't understand, and I'm not asking you to
What's exactly the question? I can talk a 101, TERS 101 in 60 seconds. Okay. We'll see what I can do. So across the city of Houston, and cities are the only entity that can initiate TERSs. Counties can ask cities to create TERSs on their behalf. There are these special zones called tax increment reinvestment zones. And so basically what happens, they're carved up geographically, right? Basically what happens within a TERS is that every taxing entity forgoes the growth of taxes that's collected. So let's say around this circle, I created a TERS last year, and HISD, Harris County, City of Houston, we're all collecting taxes. They keep that base rate, but anything that grows above it is then put into this special pot, right? And the special pot has some restrictions on it. I don't think the restrictions are well enough defined. I think they should be stricter, but they should be for community economic development, public infrastructure, which we know is desperately needed in order to actually do good development, right? Like Christa and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, like you can build a house, but if there's no street and there's no light and there's no sewage, like the asset that you're giving people is really, really shoddy, and like no one's gonna wanna move there, right? They would actually maybe rather rent in that scenario. And also affordable housing. So TERSs have this someone call it a slush fund, of money that has all these allowable uses. And if you have, all TERSs are supposed to have a plan and how they're going to enact them. Some have very loose plans, some have very, very detailed plans. What happens frequently is that the city is able to dip into TERS dollars in order to support housing work, right? Because the housing budget, if we look at the general fund versus a lot of other departments, relies actually on federal dollars and dipping into TERS funds a lot to support its activities. So TERSs are there to act as a financing mechanism frequently for different buildings. So for example, or different projects. So for example, the ION received TERS funding as a part of its financing to be able to open its doors, right? And there are plenty of other projects that you see across, anytime you see that little Midtown squiggly line thing, I don't really understand the logo, it was before my time. That is a sign that it's, part of a TERS investment, part of a TERS project. And again, it's about using public dollars for public good, right? And so if we say that these dollars are for affordable housing, they're for community economic development, they're for public infrastructure, we really want that to be the kind of affordable housing development and infrastructure that's desired in the community, that's immediately necessary, and that helps prepare us for the future of the city that we want to live in. So that's my best attempt at TERS 101. I think I was in it in like 90 seconds there, but okay, phew.
No, she hit everything in terms of the nail on the head. I just wanted to add another layer of just kind of one of the policies that we're working on. According to our state legislator, we are entitled up to 75% of the property tax from the city of Houston for the properties that we develop. So hoping with some help with some elected officials, then we can get that going so we can be a TERS in a sense for the communities that don't have one, right? Because most of the TERS that are in Black and brown communities, I think it's 3rd Ward. Of course, Midtown touches a piece of 3rd Ward and Sunnyside, but areas like Acres Home, the Northeast, there's 5th Ward as well. Then there's, Setagast. That's one of the communities that we have. There's 100 acres out in Setagast that's been undeveloped for over 100 years and doesn't have literally a road, a water line. It still baffles me to hear that, right? But I'm hoping through the policy work, then we can have another funding source in order to reinvest back into the communities that we develop.
And I'll say TERSs are like one of the mechanisms, right? There's several different mechanisms that we could use. There are what are called 380 agreements, which are tax incentives and tax abatements. A hell of a ton of the city of Houston and Harris County is in an opportunity zone, and we have not set strong enough guidelines for how people will, participate in opportunity zones. So you're able to build a Heinz Tower in downtown, and it can get an opportunity zone tax break instead of, an affordable housing structure getting an OZ. So there's lots of different areas where we could set the groundwork better, and we ought to set the groundwork better so that we can actually live in the city that we want to live in.
But I think too, to speak from a different perspective, you need more developers on the ground that even want to build and participate in that space.
We don't make it attractive.
And they make it, and they understand how to maneuver in that space. I think one of the biggest hurdles, to go back to what you're saying, and working at the city and working with the smaller developers, they got the funds, but didn't understand the red tape that came behind it. And that became an issue. And it incentivized decision makers to say, okay, well, I'm going to kind of steer clear of this because they have a mandate, right? And they have a goal and objective set for them. So I think that, I don't know how that happens, that capacity building happens, but that needs to happen, at the ground level.
And Jason raises a really good point. So Mayor Turner has a single-family home initiative. His goal is to build 2,000 single-family homes by 2023. That's where he's putting his feather in his hat, right, for affordable housing. So you're looking between 60, 80% AMI, right? So we've did one of our first ribbon cuttings at Robbins Landing with Habitat. And when we did the call out for that deal, like he was talking about acquisition, developers who had their land were the ones who were at the table. And so we need them to say that they're willing to participate in our program to meet our priorities, right? So, we had folks from, Dick Weekly, on down to smaller box developers interested in how can we do this. So Jason's absolutely right. You need people who understand and that are willing to play in that world and understand what the city or whatever government entities guidelines are so they can be successful. And when they're big box and they have capacity, they know how to make that move. If they're smaller box, sometimes they can't absorb the front end cost of that, right? They have to make it worthwhile. And so those are the things that we're working through from our contract agreements and strategically identifying nonprofits and smaller developers. But you're right, for every developer, that's not their market. They don't want to do that. They want to do 9% deals. They want to do private market.
The least path of resistance.
Right, they don't want to fool with us. They got to come fool with council. They don't want to deal with that. They want to go make their money and do what they got to do. And so we have to encourage, we're trying to make our programs appealing enough for someone to say, yeah, I'll try. What are y'all doing?
And then there's the in-between space as well, where I don't want Lloyd to get lost, because you have a part of this puzzle too, right? Because there's the policy that happens, there are the developers, but we need more people who on a community level can organize and say, hey y'all, there's this resource. And take the research and all the data like Lloyd does and says, okay, well, listen, this is what the policy says, but here are the statistics. So you guys, here's the opportunity. Let's show up in these numbers. And then you start to shift those power dynamics and give the community more opportunities that way as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we make sure that we want to do, and we realize, just like you say, the barriers to entry. A lot of companies didn't know the different things that it took to even, wasn't prepared for a net 30, a net 45, and to be doing work at that capacity and still be able to maintain their daily work in order to make money. And we understood that. So a lot of the things that we want to do with Creative Group Economics and CGE Services is basically, we want to have that ground level of already having our insurance and bonding and stuff already ready, and we already kind of setting aside that capacity that they can handle. So we want to be able to focus on who can handle what and be able to direct them towards what is the best fit for what they're trying to do. And we talk about going back and funding. Anybody that know anything about the Black Store is exactly what we did. Create a C Corp, show people how to come together and get investors and pull them into what we're trying to do, and protect yourself at the same time. We had people signing memorandums of understanding and understanding what we're doing, and that this wasn't going to be a quick turnaround. So I think in order with the deals and contracts and capacity is just getting people to understanding this is what it is and this is what it's going to take to get this done.
And I would say just one thing I want to add is that it's part of the reason that it's so important, other than the fact that we have an extraordinary need for this housing, right, and the development of this generational wealth. Part of the reason it's really important to get this small scale and meso-scale development ecosystem right is, one, it's more accountable to the community, right? You see the entire lifespan of a project being more ethical, so better labor protections for as you build up. But we're also dealing nationally, but you can really see it here in Houston, with the problem of corporate home ownership, right? And so you'll see these venture-backed, private equity firms, which was a practice that started after the collapse in 2008 and has just continued, where they are able to buy homes on a fire sale kind of basis, and then they're able to resell them. So if you all remember, Zillow bought a bunch of houses because of an algorithm. And I thought, oh, this is a cool opportunity. Let me call the Director of Housing or Community Services Department, which is our housing kind of department at the county, and see what would it maybe even possibly look like for us to buy some of those homes. I set this meeting up on a Wednesday. The meeting's on a Friday. Friday morning, Pretium, which is a venture capital fund, private equity, has bought all of those homes, not just in the Houston area, but nationwide. And we see this thing, and that's not the only example, right? We have, over 20,000 units that are owned just like that. And it's astonishing, and those are people who are only in it for profit, right? And in it for displacement, frankly, like profit at the expense of a family, right? So I think that that's another reason why we absolutely have to get this right, because the trend of private equity in the home ownership landscape, they will sell you a house, they will rent you a house, they will kick you out of that house, they will foreclose on you, they will evict you, is incredibly important. And you do not have that kind of relationship, or you're much less likely to have that kind of relationship with someone who is from your community, who built your home, who helped you finance your home, right? Who put in, all of this back behind the scenes effort. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so all of this is a cycle, right? We can trace this all the way back to redlining before then, and a lot of policy. And so again, if you are not tapped into that and you don't know how to influence it, that's why you need a team. You need everybody who's sitting on this panel. You need people who are doing the work on the street so they can say, okay, in theory, this sounds right, but can we add this? And someone else who says, okay, well, this is gonna cost you this much, and where can we push on those costs and not have it count someone out. And so as we bring our conversation to a close and we think about how we work together to go into communities, we, the Third Ward Real Estate Council, we want to continue to be a hub. We want to continue to facilitate these kinds of conversations and these types of opportunities to come together and say, hey, please, meet Councilmember Thomas, meet Jason, meet Zoe, meet Lloyd, meet Christa. Do not leave today without these people's information. Not so you can call them every day and say, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. But so you know where to go for the resources, you know? Because it's going to take all of us to be able to collectively have a say in our community and make sure that we have a community today and tomorrow. So thank you guys so much for today's conversation. I'm gonna take about, let's see where we are. I did good on time, y'all. So we're gonna have, does anyone have any questions? We have about 5-10 minutes. Anybody have a question for our panelists? Okay, I'm gonna go work my way this way. So, yes? Yes, you.
Hello. Okay, so let's just say, okay, we're excited now, you know, because you got to give people while they're excited. What do we do in 5 steps? What are the first 5 steps we need to do in order to save our community? What would you guys say?
I'm going to hop in and say become a supporter of the Third Ward Real Estate Council. But I'll open it up to anybody have?
I do. For one, I would say, first of all, get involved. All of us, when people come to our community meetings, the first thing I ask is, what is your zip code? What civic club do you involve? Who is your city council member? And a lot of the times when we have a meeting of 50 people, maybe one person know who their city council person is. So the first thing is get involved and know the information and knowing the things around you. I think that that's step one, and that'll hold you for a little while. So, and once that's done, then just actively get involved with those people, know who those people are. That's important. A lot of people, we understand what needs to be done, but we don't go to the people that actually handles those levers.
Yeah, and understand there's abundance, right? So you can operate from a space of abundance, so that way you can treat the work differently.
And the best way to finish is to get started, because sometimes, you know, you want to calculate so much in your mind that you're not moving, right? And of course you want to work with your civic club, your super neighborhood, even if it's just your group of friends, to define what is your agenda and then start walking towards it, right? So proud of, you know, the Hymans for putting this together and walking and bringing us together to have these important conversations. It's needed because we need to be in the same room. We need to outline what your respective role is and start going.
Oh yeah, and if you need a way to get involved, we do have a community meeting once a month, every second Monday from 7 to 8. We start on time, we end on time, just to let you know. And then I'll direct you. This next one is going to be at Spivey's Uptown. That's on 3000 Blodgett. And once you sign in, trust me, I'm going to have your information. I'm going to bug you every month about a meeting. So, and the work doesn't start at the meeting. That is just the beginning of showing you what we do, and you can know who we are. But the work is every day.
I'm gonna say start building your team. So, and what that means is, I'm not saying go out and find every professional you need, but like when you're talking about real estate and ownership in your community, you guys are gonna need, somebody's gonna need the time to do the work. Somebody's gonna need the experience to make sure that things are connecting, and then somebody's gonna need to have the money or the opportunity. So like putting those 3 things together, like identify who you are and fill the gap for the other 2 if you do not have those. and then connect with those professionals so you can move forward.
And I think what's helpful for me, be clear about what you want to do. So my time is really limited. I'll talk to anyone, but I'm interested. If you just say, I want to serve in my community, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. It could be a variety of things. So master your craft and be clear about what you want to do. So when you have the opportunity to make the ask, they understand. Because I'll start thinking and saying, and you want to do what? Well, come on, let me go talk to. So we can be thoughtful about it. And if you don't know, spend the time in thinking about what is it that means to you when you say, I want to preserve and protect my neighborhood. Is that public safety? Is that, like, I don't know what that means because everyone comes to it differently. And so if you want to get the very best out of busy people, be clear about what you want to do so we can move for you and get you what you need.
Hi, I have a question for Ms. Thomas. We provide senior housing. Does the city already have an initiative? We provide senior housing. Does the city already have an initiative to help with the seniors housing?
Absolutely. So senior housing is actually one of the administration's priorities, and it shows up in two forms. One, there's a state program that opens up at the end of the year and comes to council at the beginning of the year. It's our 9% tax credit program, and the city offers a resolution. Those are tax credits funded by the state. But they're looking for local priorities. The second opportunity for that is the city will put out a notice of funding availability. It's commonly known as a NOFA. And when we ask developers to submit projects that fit within our priorities, and then those come to council. Sometimes those are, we may have some additional dollars left over to supplement your cost. And so I think we've had like 3 or 4 rounds of that. But absolutely, I mean, the reality is that as people age, they want to stay in place and age in place, but the affordability and the quality of home is not there. So it is a huge focus. And if we can just go back to the drama that, our housing department was all in the news about, right, senior housing, right? So it is a priority, and we want to make sure that in every corridor that a senior can age in place and have access to transit, workforce centers, good clean air, and amenities. But yes, to answer your question, yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. I asked a similar question earlier, but I hearing some of what I've heard now, I'm curious. In the academic space, in the city space, in various groups supporting both of those environments, do you know of anyone who's working on something that I'm planning to create myself, and I want to ask before I go through the effort, if it already exists, is basically a community equity roadmap. So like, I used to work as an engineer in development. There was always a roadmap that says, developer, this is how you have to submit this, and then you have to do this, and then on this date you do that, and then you need these resources, and we require this statement of funding and this, just all the different processes. And it's like, if we could reverse that and say, if you have an air problem, if you have a home that's this age, if you have a senior, what is your roadmap? And then it's almost like you start showing people the pathway to equity, because a lot of people don't even understand that there's 25 steps to solving what looks like a very obvious problem. And it's hard to educate people without some of these graphics. And before I embark on that, I'm wondering if that's something happening in the academic environment being studied already, because it would help educate the educators, and help educate the guardians in the community as well, as to, now I know what I actually need to do to solve 5 different problems that are happening even on a single block. There's 5 different types of problems that no one solution will work for.
Sure. So at Prairie View, no, but I will say that the community equity conversation, Dr. Kleinberg, I think he has a very strong foundation for that. Now, what that information does not do is necessarily inform how we approach solving that. It gives us the data to identify what these indicators are telling us. I will say, when the county and the city joined together for that rent relief program, that equity data that was pushed, so the first time we did rent relief, it was gone like in 60 minutes. And then we had, feedback. Advocates was like, this cannot be first come, first serve. Again, it goes back to us doing things in practice. I think once that dashboard was created to really look at equity and really scale that, that's a good, I think this is happening in multiple places. All of that is there, those pieces are not linked, right? The county, right, they're not linked, but you have organizations that are tracking equity, you have governments that are tracking it, but not in terms of creating a roadmap to solve where they're all linked to inform us. I can't put, you got to go between.
Yeah, I don't.
Child, you know how long it take to pick up late trash in the city sometimes. So I think.
I haven't seen it. We just tackle problems as they come up.
Yeah.
And go at it. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's portions that tell us a story where we know where there are gaps. There's community organizations that are doing phenomenal work that presented to council. Was it the Northeast Coalition on the Northeast Action? Phenomenal work in terms of like draining information and breaking it down by district. So you have that, but we don't have like a public facing portal at Houston Public Works where you could see that in real time, right? So some of the departments, they're moving towards a more public facing because the public is demanding like, what's happening? I keep flooding or I keep X, Y, and Z. So we're getting there. We're not all the way there, but to your point of where it's all connected and it's informing us to be efficient, no.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was definitely going to say that no, it's not. And that comes in a lot of different sections. And I guess we always looking at it when it comes to the political type of thing. So we spoke about that a little bit in the lab and talking about putting into different information and different algorithms and coming out with some type of answer. And I think, like you say, just our group, paid political advocates for independent democracy, we looking at all this different stuff and to compile all this different information it's a headache. When you want to go find a map from here, when you want to find a budget for here, when you want to find this for this, and that goes with everything in a lot of our cities. Even if you're a business owner and you're trying to figure out how to pay your franchise and your sales tax, it's a job. So I think a lot of those different sections can be created in a lot of different avenues and ways that a lot of cities like Shreveport, which is so small, have already kind of done. And I think we can just kind of take those same roadmaps.
Hi, can y'all hear me? Hello, y'all. Hi. Thank y'all for this panel. It's been really wonderful to hear from y'all. I'm also going to take this opportunity to be a little bit vulnerable, and I'm thinking about some of the questions that people are asking about how do we get started. And I think I'm a little bit more interested. My name is Eris, by the way. Hi, y'all. I'm a little bit more interested in how folks in Houston, especially ones in positions of power, business owners, elected officials, folks who have CEO titles, all of those sorts of things, how they can best, or how you are looking forward to reinforcing the practices, the cultural practices of community organizing. Because there are folks who are doing the work. They have compiled an idea with specific asks, specifically H said with the community benefits agreements that was not implemented. How do you, as a person in power in your specific field, look forward to fostering those cultural practices? Before I moved back to Houston, was not interested in community organizing, was not interested in, or did not know where to start when it came to advocating for community needs and gentrification and things like that. So I'm curious about how you, as a person in power, is looking forward to incentivizing and honoring those practices, because at my point, with all of the organizations I'm a part of, I haven't seen the significant change even after all of the work that has been put in. So how do you, as a person in power, look to foster those sorts of community organizing efforts and engagement within the city? Because I haven't seen it so much yet.
I actually want to, I think we're all like,
that's
go
me.
ahead.
No, I'm excited for that question. That made me perk up because I am so looking forward to the things that I'm gonna do. I used to make the presentations to the Planning Commission, right? And I did my absolute best to incorporate equity work into subdivision plats, right? But ultimately, the ordinance, the way it was written, definitely didn't allow much opportunity. So I've sat in different seats, whether I was a community organizer in one seat, I was working as a city representative for almost 10 years, and I'll just say at the tables that I sat, I definitely was comfortable with bringing up uncomfortable situations. So the fact that my board and the people that supported me in this new role were behind me being authentically myself as a Black woman. I'm the 5th Black woman in the nation to lead a land bank. That is still weird for me to say out loud because most of the land banks serve the communities that look like us, but you're telling me I'm only the 5th one, right? So in terms of how I'm looking forward to it, I'm absolutely changing the culture of how we do our work. You can ask my team member here, Jen, who was there since day one, or former colleague here in the front, Sam, who was part of creating it, right? And breaking down these barriers and walls and just informing people and me being intentional about showing up to these spaces. We're gonna ramp things up a lot in a little bit because I need to finish building up my team, right? To Jason's point, right? We're bringing on a real estate attorney who has experience with tax foreclosures and liens and all these different issues there. I'm working on trying to hire someone in community engagement so we can go out in the communities that we own property. I'm not even sure if some of our board members have seen the properties that we own. I don't understand why not, but that's okay. I'm happy to organize a tour and take you over, to meet some of the local business owners that I'm aware of in these respective spaces. So it starts by somebody raising their hand and just always having an open seat at the table for the community, which I happily do. And I'm more than looking forward to what's to come.
I think if I could add to that as well, is how we all come to the table together, right? Because I think that I felt the feeling that you've described in wanting to know, okay, well, how do I change things? And then I became an urban planning student. And then once I had my urban planning degree, I said, okay, well, now I'm gonna work at the housing department. And then working in and saying, okay, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, but who do I need to know? Who really moves the needle? And now from going outside of it and taking all of those things to say, okay, we're going to create a space like this. Because I think that the passion invokes this feeling of frustration sometimes, of restlessness sometimes, and saying, why isn't anybody doing it? I haven't seen it yet. But you're looking at literally over each person at least 15 years of work doing it and coming into the spaces different way, taking that frustration and saying, okay, well, how do I apply it to this situation and understand the power dynamics so I can use them to my benefit? And so I think that in being mindful and keeping to do the work, even when you're tired, but also being gracious with those who have been in it, to understand that they're just as frustrated as you. They just may be going about it a different way than you are, but there is a happy space in between where they're always happy to have you and have those conversations and say, I got you, I see you, here's how we're approaching it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would say when you're thinking about this, I had to realize that it didn't happen overnight, so the change is not going to happen overnight. And so we have to realize we talk about the actions again. You always gonna hear me talk about economics, and some of the things that we do is building. One of the programs we have is a credit card program where our business don't pay any fees. So all the fees that go to Visa, MasterCard, now they come to us so we can repurpose it back towards the community. We've had over a couple businesses just last year processed over $1 million. Just in our beauty supply store, we have over 100 Black-owned brands that have been on our shelves. They did over 100,000 selling black soap and incense and oils. So all of the money and things that we make, and we come to talking about being a business owner, we don't take any money from our business. Everything goes back towards the programs and the things that we do. So call it putting your money where your mouth is. So we can't talk about that change if we're not willing to put our own dollars. And I tell people it's not enough grant money and money from the government in order to make this change. And I say, I'm not saying don't go after those dollars, but those are always the dessert, never the main course. And that's how we got to look at when we talking about investing in our communities and investing our own dollars. Even if you only giving back, everybody in here should be giving it back towards one organization that they feel is doing the work. If not your time, then your money. I just feel like there's no excuse. And I say the biggest excuse that anybody can tell me is that they don't have time. Because you lay out your day, I can point out something where you have time to give back towards your community or things that we're doing.
So, to all these points, the underlying thing that you're hearing is that while it's community, this is a business. It's a business of community, right? It's a lot of agencies and a lot of folks that have things going on. And I think sometimes as community, like we talked about the Planning Commission earlier, we go down, we speak from the heart. Nobody can make a decision on that, right? We have to start understanding the politics, the money, the legislation, and use that as our weapons, right? Not necessarily, just to push back, which I'm not saying that's what we do all the time, but a lot of times that's what it looks like. We have to get in these rooms, in the room, and start understanding the business of community. And I think that's where all this comes from.
Yeah, I think that's a strong place to finish, because it is work. It's money, it's work, it's time, it's all those things, but that's why we need one another. So thank you guys so much for being in this conversation with us. We are going to get ready to wrap up, and I'll give you 5 minutes, stretch your legs, and then we're going to transition into our afternoon classes, believe it or not. Oh, I'm sorry, did I leave somebody? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that, I think you mentioned conflict, and being like okay with conflict is really important. There are people on this panel that I have conflict with, and that's fine. It's generative. It's not something that we should shy away from, and I don't think we should allow, when we get in conflict with people, to be misrepresented. And I'd also say that I think a lot of this policy work, a lot of the work of making demands, of getting to know people and making demands together, is also like cultural work, and that does, you were just saying, like it takes a long time, and so we've seen, thanks to HSED, thanks to Northeast Action Collective, thanks to all these other grassroots efforts, we've seen expectations shift, and I think it's really important to hold the standard and to be responsive to that standard, because if you're not, you probably don't deserve the power that you've been given, or someone should take it away from you. That's all.
Thank you. Thank y'all. Thank you guys. Thank you for pointing it. And so, I hope that you guys are still energized, still feel good. We learned a lot. We're getting a lot of information today. So let's keep going.